Welcome to the new podcast, A Mick, a Luke, and a Mike, hosted by Billy O'Connor and Frank Pace.
My brother, how are you today, pal? How
Good.
you doing? How
Good.
they hanging?
Good.
How they hanging?
They're hanging the same way I left them. It's Saturday, October 10th. We have a great show today. We're going to be talking a little Frank Sinatra. We're going to be talking a little Don Rickles. Before we get to our guest, Tony Opadesano, known as Tony O, I want to ask you a little about your experience in the saloon business, because Frank and Don were the ultimate saloon performers.
And Sinatra definitely without a doubt the ultimate saloon singer. Him and Tony
Bennett?
Tony Bennett.
Holy
Anthony
shit.
Benedito, is that it?
Anthony Benedino.
Anthony Benedito, right?
Yep.
Tony Bennett and Sinatra were the ultimate saloon singers. My saloon was a totally different thing altogether. I was around in the 70s, early 70s. We did hardcore rock and roll, bust out joint. You know, when I first opened the joint, we built this beautiful joint, you know, and the big joint in Queens on Flushing. And I wanted to do jazz. I said, let's get the kids out. We'll do a nice, soft jazz club, you know, be nice, you know, keep the elderly people in. So my partner says, yeah, great idea. So we throw all this money into the club, and the first couple of nights we're there, all these people come in, they listen to jazz. Well, guess what? When people listen to jazz, they smoke a joint, they take a glass of wine, and they sip on the wine like this, and they listen to jazz, right? And then meanwhile, we're keeping all these kids out, and they're lined up to get in. And I said, look, screw the jazz. Let's go rock and roll or Irish music, anything. Let's get them drinking. We'll charge $5 a head at the door, and we'll bust the place out. We'll put 200 or 300 people in, and we'll be selling space. So that's what I started doing. But then, of course, when you got 300 or 400 kids coming into your place every night, you got a security problem. You got to make sure you got plenty of bounces. So it was costing me $500 or $600 a night for bounces. I said, screw this. I got the biggest. I got smart. I had Buffalo, who was the biggest guy. I mean, he was my main man. I used to pay him. And I just pick out all the big, gentle giants I see who used to come into the place, and I give them free Poets Staff shirts, right? So it cost me Poets Staff. So it looked like I had an army of guys working for me. Of course, the guys always wanted to wear the shirt because they figured they get laid because they got their Poets Staff, right? So I had all these big guys walking around with Poets Staff, you know? And then it only cost me the one bouncer. So I cut the tab on that.
That's great. So how much money were you making in your heyday?
Oh, I guess in the heyday I was making, you know, back then, which was 79, 80. I was probably making about $4,000 a week, which was big money for a fireman. I was only getting paid $350 every 2 weeks as a fireman.
So you're making $4,000 a week?
Yeah, about $4,000 a week.
And how much would you spend gambling?
Forget about it. You know, the Romans have a great saying. The Romans say, those whom the gods would destroy, they make successful young. I couldn't even handle holding the bar. I mean, I was putting it up my nose. I had to cook a lot of girls. It was like, forget about it. I mean, you know, I was a mess. I was worse gambling, you know. But, yeah, but I had a lot of fun. I mean, I had a lot of fun.
Speaking about a lot of fun, today we're going to have a lot of fun.
Oh, man, I can't wait. You know, to me, Tony O #1 is going to be a big kick for me. And I got a million questions I want to ask him because I'm a huge Sinatra fan, always have been, and Rickles, of course. You know, I was a comic, a half-assed comic. So
our guest today is Tony Opadesano, which will be the last time I mention his last name because he's always been Tony O to me. He was a Frank Sinatra confidant, road manager for Sinatra, road manager for Don Rickles, the author of a new book, Sinatra and Me in the Wee Small Hours by Simon & Schuster, will be out in May 2021. Welcome, Tony O.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
an honor for me.
Pleasure's mine.
So you want to start? You have so many questions?
Yeah, I got. Well, you know, I'm as a writer. I mean, Pete Hamill wrote a great book about Sinatra.
Mhm.
I mean, a great book.
Why
about
Frank
Sinatra.
matters. Yeah.
Why Frank Sinatra matters.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you know, even in journalism school, there was everybody had to read. There was one article in Esquire magazine written about Sinatra, and it was called "Frank Sinatra Has a Cold."
Yeah.
And it's a classic magazine article. I encourage anybody out there
Mhm.
who wants to know anything about Sinatra to read that article. It's just a great article.
Yeah.
But Hamill called him the poet laureate of loneliness, Sinatra. Knowing him individually, was he a lonely guy? I mean, he sang about loneliness. That was his thing, the wee small hours.
Well, he hated the nighttime. I mean, he felt more vulnerable at night, and he didn't like to be alone. It came from when he was a kid, because he was an only child, and his father was a fireman, as well as owning a club, and his mother was a ward boss for the Democratic Party in Hoboken. She was also a midwife.
Right.
And he used to tell me, he says, if the phone would ring, he says, I knew one of them was leaving. And then when he'd come home from school, even, there was usually nobody home. And he would either go across the hall to this lady, Mrs. Goldberg, or his grandmother's, or he'd go to the club where his father, Marty O'Brien's.
And Marty was a pretty good fighter, wasn't he?
Yeah. Yeah. Matter of fact, when he started boxing as an amateur, he went by young Marty O'Brien. Yeah.
And this is in Hoboken, I guess.
Yeah.
Back in Hoboken.
Back in Hoboken.
And Dolly was his mom,
Yeah.
right?
Natalie, but she went by Dolly. Yeah. She was tough. She was tougher than both of them put together.
Wow.
Yeah, she was a character. I never had the good fortune of meeting her. The night I was supposed to meet her is actually the night that her plane went missing, and we found, Frank found out that she had passed it. They crashed into a mountain.
Yeah, that broke him up, didn't it? He was a mama's boy, right?
Oh yeah,
well,
absolutely.
I think all Italians are to an extent, no?
To an extent.
Yeah,
well, that's who the boss is. Everybody knows that.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's, most Italian husbands say, I'm the boss, and I have my wife's permission to say that.
Yeah, we had Joe Swick on, who was the director of My Big Fat Greek Wedding, and that's one of the lines in My Greek Wedding. He says, I'm the head of the family. And his wife says, but I'm the neck. I turn the head.
So before we continue, in honor of the day.
Yeah.
Yeah, I got to reach
The horse's head?
Oh, now that's a lid.
Oh, nice. Nice.
Oh, I guess I can't.
Now that's a lid.
Tilt it a little. You look like a priest. Hey, nice.
Does that work?
Yeah.
Do I look a little bit like him? No.
No.
You got eyes on either side of your nose, just like him. It's uncanny.
I'm looking for a buck, Frank. I want to play a number in Brooklyn.
Now we can continue.
He breaks out the lid, huh? Marty O'Brien's, yeah. So, but it's interesting that Frank hated the nighttime. You say so?
Well, that's,
is that why he spent most of the time awake during the night? Yeah.
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 He always felt vulnerable at night because that's why, like, when he grew up and he was calling the shots as best as he could do, every night was almost like New Year's Eve. That's just the way he liked.
He liked the roll. He liked the party.
Yeah.
And there's been so many comments throughout the years. I mean, I've watched 1 million documentaries about Sinatra. I mean, how many guys can you actually say? I mean, an icon. I mean, here's a guy who had a hit in the 30s, the number one hit in the 40s, the 50s, the 60s, the 70s. And who does that? Who has hits in 7
generations?
It's crazy.
7 decades.
7 decades. It's crazy. And they even played this song on the moon.
Yeah.
They land on the moon. It's Fly Me to the Moon. They're playing it.
I had the good pleasure of telling Alan Shepard a story about that because growing up in high school, I was already a fan of Sinatra and Basie and Ella Fitzgerald, and these guys are listening to Mick Jagger and all of that stuff. Sure. I says, come on, for Christ's sake, with that stuff. So when that happened, when they played that Fly Me to the Moon from the Moon, I went into school. The next time I was in school, I said, did you hear the Mick Jagger song from the...
Put me in, Coach. I don't smoke.
I told Alan Shepard that story because he was a good friend of Frank's. I got to know him too. I says, you guys made me a hero in school.
That's great. That's a great story.
So where did you grow up, Tony?
Brooklyn. I was born and raised in Brooklyn. And we lived on a street called Eldridge Avenue, which is literally the last street in Brooklyn. Across the street was Queens, right down the block from Jamaica Avenue, Franklin K. Lane High School. And then, like most families, when I got out of 6th grade. I went to Catholic school with a buddy of mine, Antonio Iadanza,
Who's known as?
Tony Danza.
Yeah.
We went to school from kindergarten to like the 5th grade together. And then we moved to Franklin Square, Long Island, right next to Elmont. And I went to high school in Floral Park, Sewanaka High School. And when I graduated from Sewanaka, then my father bought a house in Ronkonkoma. And then when I left to come to California, he moved to Mastic. And I used to tease with him. I says, Dad, you keep moving east, you're going to have a British accent soon.
So when did you were playing Vegas in a lounge act?
I was working.
And Frank saw you there. How did it?
No,
that come
I
about?
actually met Frank. I'll back up a little bit. As I said, I became a fan of Sinatra's when I was 12, 13 years old. And he did a phenomenal live album called Sinatra at the Sands with Count Basie in 1965. And on that album, he kept talking about Jillies and Jillies and Jillies and Jillies. So when I got old enough to start playing clubs, which...
You were a piano player.
Back that piano, guitar, yeah. Back then you had to be 18 to work in a club, but I had a guy that made me, phony ID.
They were checking library cards.
So I was 17 and I had a license, because back then the only people that had a picture on the license is if you were a chauffeur.
Right.
And so I had a license that said I was 18. So I started playing clubs when I was 17. As soon as I started going into the city, I got to check this place out. So I found Jilly's on 52nd Street, right next door to what then was the Alvin Theater. Now it's the Neil Simon Theater, the show that Cher's life story was playing right there. And I walked in, and I was always in a tuxedo because that's the way we worked back then. And Uncle Frank, who was Jilly's older brother, ran the club when Jilly was off on the road or doing something with Sinatra. And we hit it off because, believe it or not, I started smoking cigar. Back then you could smoke in a bar. And so I was smoking a cigar one day. And Uncle Frank says, geez, that smells good. What is it? I said, the punch. Why? I like this. So we hit it off. You're always in a tuxedo. What do you do? I said, well, I'm an entertainer. I'm a musician. I'm a singer. Really? So you gigging tonight? I said, yeah, that's why I'm in a tuxedo. He said, well, why don't you come back and sit in with the guys? I'd like to hear you.
Wow.
So later that night, I went back and I sat in. It went well. He said, I got to introduce you to my brother. Okay. So maybe 4 months later, Jilly was finally back in New York. And he lived upstairs. He had an apartment above the club. And Jilly, I don't know if you guys are aware, but Jilly also was an amateur boxer. And he had a detached retina. So one of his eyes looked this way. One was this way and the other one was that way. So he finally comes downstairs the night that I'm supposed to meet him. And the joint was packed, 3 deep at the bar. And he comes downstairs and Uncle Frank says, Jilly, come here. There's a guy who wants to see you, and I want to introduce you to that kid, Tonio Pedisano, I was telling you about. And so I have my back to the bar, and he's facing the bar, and there's another guy on the other side of him. And so he says, so how you doing? And I'm sipping my drink. And he says, you working, or what are you doing, what? And I still didn't say anything to him. So now he smacks me on the shoulder. He says, what are you, deaf or something? I'm talking to you. I says, Jilly, I knew you had a bad eye. I didn't know if you were talking to him or you were talking to me. I'm sorry. I like this kid. He said. So we hit it off, and then he heard me play, and he put me in a rotation. So I started working occasionally at the club, but I used to hang out in there plenty. And about maybe 9 months or so into me developing a relationship with Jilly, he says, I got to introduce you to the old man. I think you guys would hit it off. And Frank was just coming into his self-imposed retirement in the early 70s. So I literally met him on December 8th, 1972. I had just turned 21, and it was 4 days before his 57th birthday is when we met. And we were working, I was working at another club, and then I came over Frank Jr. was working at the Rainbow Room, and he had flown in to see his kids' show. And so I went, I got done early, and I went over to the Rainbow Room. And I had paid the guy in the afternoon to save me a seat. Well, when I walked in, he brings a table through. So much for being inconspicuous. I'm the only guy in the audience in a tuxedo.
Well, he saved you a seat.
No,
Saved you
he
the table.
saved me a seat, all right. So, and it's funny because Frank Jr. is on stage, and Larry O'Brien, trombone player, was his band leader. I knew Larry from doing gigs out on Long Island. So I sit down, and it's like all of a sudden the focus is now on me. And I ordered a drink, and Frank Jr. starts to sing one of his dad's tunes, and the audience applauded wildly. And he says, "I'm glad that you reacted like that." He says, "Because you're closer to Frank Sinatra right now than you know." And he glanced over at his father, who was sitting just outside.
Wow.
And Frank gave him one of those looks. And he said, "No, ladies and gentlemen, this is Dad's tuxedo. I borrowed it." Yeah.
So he got out
That's
the
how,
back door.
that's how
Yeah.
I got away with that one. And later that evening, as the show ended, they were sneaking out through the kitchen, and Jilly says, "I'll see you over at the joint." So I went back over to the club, and maybe an hour later, there's a ruckus, and
The man himself.
here he comes. And
Now, for those in the audience, Chili's was, he was very close to Jilly as a friend, right? But Chili's he did most of his drinking, that and Toots Shor's?
Toots Shor's, Danny's Hideaway, but Jilly's was the place where he would end up ultimately, no matter where else he was in the city. That's where he would end up, because Jilly befriended Frank when Frank's career was in the toilet. And Jilly was a man about town. And he was working at the Copa because of his friendship with the real owner,
Jules Padell?
no, Frank Costello.
Oh,
The real owner.
The real owner.
Frank Costello.
The real owner. No, it's funny. I mean, when his career was in the toilet, loyalty, those guys kept him working. They kept him working in Chicago. They kept him working at the Fontainebleau in Florida until he, then when his career took off again. But he never forgot, and he kept working those places, even though they couldn't afford him, just to pay them back.
I would guess that the Copa sort of was like Friday night was you brought your gumata, and Saturday night you brought your wife.
Wives. That's right.
It's the way it was, huh?
That's the way it was.
Yeah, but Sinatra, everything you read about Sinatra, of course, the legendary volatile Sinatra temper. But you don't hear enough about his generosity.
Oh.
I mean, the guy was, the stuff I'm reading about him, Lee J. Cobb.
I put a lot of stuff in the book about that because he was very uncomfortable with that. He felt it's just the right thing to do.
Always anonymous, yeah.
Yeah. If I had a nickel for every time we'd go into a city and he'd read a story about someone that was down on their luck, and next thing I know, I'd be in a limousine with an envelope with $10,000 in cash.
Tony, take care of that.
Take care of that. Is your name so-and-so? Yes, this is for you. My God, who's this from? A friend. Things will get better.
Amazing.
Yeah.
This is sort of like The Millionaire. I can't explain how it's happened, but it's sort of analogous to The Millionaire on TV, right?
Kind of.
An anonymous donor would give a guy $1 million and he'd change his life forever.
He got very uncomfortable when people would say, Frank, I'll tell you a quick story about Harry Guardino, who was a good friend. And he did Harry a major solid. And so we were meeting up for dinner at Dominic's, a restaurant down in Rancho Mirage. And I says to Harry, I said, listen, don't lean too heavy on, he knows you appreciate what he did. That don't make him uncomfortable. Well, a couple of drinks into it, Harry couldn't help himself, and he kept saying, Frank, you don't know. Yeah, I know. Don't worry about it. But Frank. Well, ultimately, Frank said, all right, you know what? Enough about that crap. Harry said, what do you mean? He says, doing things for people makes me feel good, okay? So it had nothing to do with you. At the end of the day, I'm a selfish prick. It's all about me. He says, now what are we having for dinner?
Yep. Unbelievable.
That's the only way he
could. But I read stories about Joe Louis, Sugar Ray Robertson, the people he took care of. Lee J. Cobb. I mean, he barely knew him.
George Raft.
I didn't know about Georgie Raft, yeah?
Yeah. What people don't know about Joe Louis, the boxer, is that not only did he get him the gig as the greeter at Caesars, I'm telling stories that'll be in my book, but so what? People don't know that he made arrangements through like Cliff Perlman, the guys that were running Caesars, and he paid Joe's salary. Frank did.
Oh, wow.
So Caesars
Wow.
wasn't even paying him. He had his business manager, Sonny Golden,
How
make
classy.
arrangements. So the check had Caesars on it, but it
How classy
was
is
Frank's
that?
money. Yeah, that's who he was. That's who he
So
was.
when you started working with Frank in the mid '80s, how did that come about?
Well, I gave up my performing career in the early 80s. I let my contracts play out. I was on the contract at Harrah's in Lake Tahoe. And I was doing some things at Caesars in Vegas where he was under contract. But the music business had changed completely. It went from the Great American Songbook and jazz and stuff like that to disco. And from disco it went to grunge, and from grunge it went to heavy metal. I recorded half an album with Nelson Riddle
Wow.
in the hopes of getting a recording contract, but in 1982 you couldn't give it away.
Mm-hmm.
And so I said, you know what? I don't want to end up being some 40-year-old man going bald, working in a lounge in Las Vegas with some broad with a tambourine. Forget it. No. So I shifted my sights and started producing television and loosely managing people. And my affiliation with Jilly continued, as it did with Frank, from 1972 all the way through that period. I moved to California in 1976 with a trio because the industry in New York was just disappearing. The nightclubs were closing. I had the good fortune of working the Copacabana in the lounge, and a lot of really great Joe's Pier 52, Jimmy Weston's, and a lot of the great clubs. But one by one, Eddie Condon, they were all folding.
Mm-hmm.
Jilly sold the club himself years later. He sold it, and it folded in 1980. So I moved out here because I wanted to work Vegas. I wanted to work Tahoe, and I got lucky and landed those gigs. And but when the business changed, I said, "Nah, I love it too much to you know."
Well, a good friend of mine says, in order to be successful at the highest level, you have to know your own capabilities and your own limitations. He said, I realized that he used a baseball analogy, I was never going to make it to the major leagues. At best, I would be a AAA player.
Mm-hmm.
And a AAA player I didn't want to be at 40. So at my 20s and 30s, I changed professions, and I just play on weekends as a hobby now. But that's a very astute thing that you did.
Well, I mean, actually, the reason Frank walked away, and we discussed this in later years, and it was part of what made us click, was that he wasn't sure that he was relevant to my generation. And so he figured, let me take a breather and figure things out. And between me bringing all my friends around who were in the industry, singers, musicians, thrilled in being in his company, that coupled with boatloads of mail, then he realized, well, maybe I still have something to offer.
Yeah.
And that's when he decided to come back out of retirement in a little over a year after I met him.
So what does a manager do on the road? What would you do for Frank on a daily basis?
It was more about just looking out for him, company, and negotiating deals that's all a part of it, obviously. But it wasn't very hard to be involved business-wise with Frank, because it's not like I had to make a lot of calls to see if they wanted.
Anybody ever hear of this guy?
Yeah.
I got this young kid that needs a break.
Yeah. So, and it was just more about the camaraderie,
Yeah.
more about just being there, like with Jilly.
Well, speaking of camaraderie, how'd you two guys get together? How'd you guys meet?
Me?
Yeah. How'd you two guys meet?
Well,
Wasn't a hat, was it, Frank?
no, it wasn't a hat, but a hat would have been a shortcut if I had known.
Frankie
if I had known.
Frankie the Hat.
Frankie the hat.
Tony and I were working together. I met Tony on a show I did with Don Rickles called Daddy Dearest. And Tony was Don's road manager. At the same time, he was Frank's road manager. And we got to work together then. But the first time I talked to Tony, I was with Jane Milmore and Billy Van Zandt, who were the executive producers of the show. And they said, call Tony O in Vegas. He'll get you tickets to the show because I want you to see Don's act before you talk to him. So I said, well, what's his last name? She said, you won't need his last name. So just called Caesar's Palace or the Sands or wherever else they were playing and asked for Tonio. So I dutifully dialed Tonio, and then the receptionist doesn't know who he is. I said, you must know who he is. I was told to ask for Tonio. She said, I'm sorry, sir, I don't know who he is. I said, can I speak to your supervisor, sir? And so she put the supervisor on. She said, yes, sir, may I help you? I said, Tonio, please. Coming up, sir, in a second. And then Tonio came on the phone. And we ultimately got along terrifically.
Till now.
Hey, you can't have everything.
Can't have everything.
And we ultimately got to a point that we wanted to have Frank Sinatra on the show. So Tony and I had to work out the details for that. Derek, do you have Tonio's Frank Sinatra performance on Daddy Dearest? I know I can talk until this thing is up, but I called you that morning and
16 times.
16 times.
Is he up yet?
What's he wearing? I can't imagine asking you, what's he wearing?
So it's coming, I think. But I called Tony. We had to do a lot of negotiation. Notice. Yeah. Right. And there was a younger Tony O,
Much younger.
right?
It's a great outtake.
Escorting-
What a great outtake.
Escorting him out.
Oh.
So, Tony,
Yeah.
I noticed in that take, your shirt is very similar to the shirt that Frank was wearing that day. Is that a coincidence?
No. I did it on purpose for you today. I wore this.
Why don't you tell me the
This
story
shirt.
of that shirt?
Well, Frank, as I told you before, all his clothes were custom made. And he actually designed this shirt. The only thing he changed between then and this very shirt is that he hated long sleeves and he hated short sleeves. Long sleeves, unless you're wearing French cuffs and you're dressed up, he hated folding them up because they'd always used to fall back. As you notice, he was futzing with it. So he came up with this idea of a 3/4 sleeve. And this is...
Guys were always pushing him up in them days.
Yeah,
Always.
right, yeah. So...
See,
and
man of many talents. He designed his shirt. And he was a photographer, right? Sinatra was a
yeah,
photographer.
Life magazine hired him to shoot the Ali Frazier fight at
Yeah.
Madison Square Garden.
I
Yeah.
can remember having that
Yeah.
on the Life cover of Ali and Frazier.
Yeah,
And I finally had the brains enough to save it. It's probably worth some money.
a little bit,
Yeah.
a little bit.
So you're also wearing shoes that were designed by Frank Sinatra
Yeah,
and worn by Frank Sinatra.
Yeah, these are made from a mold of his foot. But the story behind this, we were in Gothenburg, Sweden, doing a show, and no one told the catering staff that once Frank left for the stage, he wasn't coming back to the dressing room. And in their undying efforts to please him, I hear them beginning to play his overture. And I said, Frank, it's time. So he puts on his slacks because he never wanted to get creases in his pants in it. And the jacket. And I open the door to walk out into this arena. And there's a 20-year-old kid standing there with a vat of chicken soup. And he's face to face with Sinatra. And he drops it and it hits the floor. And the soup and the noodles splash all over his tuxedo. And the kid turned white as a sheet. I took out a couple of $100. I said, just get out of here. Closed the door. Vine, his dresser, she got another tuxedo. And as he's changing, I'm looking down, and the boots were ulcerating. It looked like, ostrich skin. I said, Frank, you can't wear those on stage. Oh, she doesn't have another pair of shoes. I said, well, I have Italian boots. They're not custom made. I said, but I think they'll fit you. He said, well, let me see. So I took one of my boots off, and he goes, oh, that fits good. Give me the other one. Okay, so now I walk up to this arena. I'm barefoot. And he's on stage wearing my boots. Fine. During the show, she's back there with a dryer trying to get his back to normal. We get on the jet to fly back to Germany, where we were based. We switch shoes again. 5 weeks later, I finally get back to my condo in Toluca Lake, and there's a big box there from Sinatra Enterprise. I said, what the hell is this? I just spent the last 5.5 weeks with him. I open it up, note from him. Thanks for the loaner. And he gave me 3 pairs of black and 3 pairs of brown of his custom-made boots.
Man, he dotted all the I's, huh? He never missed a beat. He was that
That's
classy.
the way he was.
And I'm wondering, can you show me your right hand?
Yeah,
What's that pinky ring I see?
that was his too.
There's a story behind that.
This is his family crest, and he used to wear this on his left hand from the mid-50s all the way up until when he married Barbara. Even though he was married to Mia, he didn't wear a wedding ring. But so when he married Barbara in 76, he took this ring off and he wore a wedding band, but he broke his hand doing Manchurian Candidate, and his hand was like that literally for the rest of his life. And so this ring wouldn't fit over his calcified pinky. So he had Bulgari make him a replica much larger, and he put this one away for safekeeping. And somewhere around 1994, we were down in the desert, as usual, and we were sitting out by the pool, and it was about 2 o'clock in the morning, sitting drinking Jack, and he was smoking his Camels, and he says, I got a favor I'd like for you to do me. Said, sure, okay. He says, I'll meet you in the theater. He had a freestanding theater on the property. So we go into the theater. He comes out of the house, and he's got this little valise, and he puts it on the table, and he says, this valise is full of things that I've been saving since the late 1930s, and it predates my relationship with Barbara. He says, and when the time is right, I want this stuff to go to my blood, to my children and Nancy Sr. He said, I don't want the stuff, the contents of this bag, to become a tug of war between Barbara and my kids. I said, okay, I'll take care of it. And he was taking it out item by item and describing what it was and how it came to be. Everything from a plastic kazoo that Nancy Jr. gave him when she was a little girl, to a diamond-studded watch, the map of Sicily that he got from some businessmen in Chicago, to a gold medal from Golda Meir for what he did for the state of Israel before they were recognized as a state of Israel. He helped get them a lot of money. That's a whole other story. So I said, fine, I'll take care of it. Don't worry about it. And he says, you know, you're like family to me. He says, and I want to prove that to you. I said, Frank, you know, no, please let me. And he takes out this little box and he says, here, this is for you. And I said, may I? I said, yeah. I open it up and it's this. He says, you know, that's the original. He says, because, you know, I broke my hand. I said, yeah, you and Henry Silva got in that karate fight. Yeah. Right. Yeah.
Wow.
So I suppose I could tell the rest of the story.
Yes, please.
Oh, please
do.
Tell a great story.
So he started getting emotional. And I'm thinking, Maron, okay, if he starts to lose it, I'm going to lose it. It's not going to be pretty. So I said, can I? He says, yeah, it's yours. I took the ring out of the box. And I said, so let me get this right. This was on your hand through Lauren Bacall, Julia Prowse, Victoria Principal, Mia Farrow, and this whole litany of names. And he says, yeah, why? And I went, he says, you crazy bastard. I said, hey, I made you laugh.
Hey, McGon, the whole works.
Now, the payoff, which I don't think I ever told you, about 3 days later, I finally went back to my condo in Toluca Lake. And I got a safe deposit box for that stuff, and I put it away. And I go to check my mail, another package from this one, though, was addressed from the house down in Rancho Mirage. And I'm saying, like, what the hell is that? I just left them. What the hell is this? And I open it up, and there's a note. Tony, this is for you. There's no discussion. Love, Frank. And he lamented that I gave up my performing career, too, because he actually was a fan of my singing and my musicianship. So I open it up, and it's a gold record. And I'm thinking, he's still trying to prove to me that he appreciates this little favor that I'm doing for him. And when I looked closer, not only is it a gold record, it's his gold record of My Way.
Wow.
Okay. Knowing that I would never be able to earn one of my own, he sent me one of his.
Wow.
Okay.
Wow.
So I pick up the phone, and I call a private line at the house in the desert, and Vine picks up the phone. It was like 3 PM. And I said, is the gorilla up? She says, yeah, he's having his breakfast. Why? I said, tell him I'm on the phone. I need to talk with him. So she pulls the phone away from her ear, and she says, Mr. S, yeah, Tony O's on the phone. He wants to talk to you. And I hear Frank chuckling, and then he says, pardon my language, tell him to read the fucking note again. And he wouldn't talk. He wouldn't come to the phone.
What a guy. He didn't even want to hear it.
No.
Well, thanks.
What? Can you tell me your favorite Sinatra song?
Probably his, which was Laura.
Really?
Really?
Laura.
Because I was going to ask you what was his.
Laura. Yeah.
Wow.
And Nancy with the laughing face, that was about his daughter, right?
That was about his daughter. And what people don't know is that Phil Silvers is the guy that wrote the lyric to that.
Phil Silvers, Bilko. Bilko wrote that.
Uh-huh.
One of my favorite all-time shows.
By the way, Derek, Bilko was a famous actor in the 50s.
Phil Silvers was.
Phil Silvers.
Sergeant Bilko was a show about a con man. I loved it. I loved it because he was a con man. It was the
man
best.
after your own heart.
Oh, I loved him.
Well, he and Phil Silvers had quite a history in World War II because Frank could not go into the service because he had a
punctured
eardrum. He actually did a bunch of USO tour shows that very few people know about. And he and Phil Silvers, they palled up to do that. They used to go to the store and buy the ugliest neckties you'd have ever seen and throw them out to the servicemen. Yeah.
And they would wear it just because they got it from Frank Sinatra and Phil Silvers.
Exactly.
I had read that he wanted to go to Korea as well, and they gave him some high horse shit about being a security risk or something.
Well, he got into a little bit of a beef because they kept wanting him to play the Officers Club. He said, I'm not here to entertain them. I'm here to entertain the rank and file guys. If that's what you have me doing, I'm not going to do anymore. And naturally, they backed off. Naturally.
Do you have any idea what Don's favorite Sinatra song was?
That's a damn good question. Probably New York, New York.
Is that right?
I would think.
I've got you under my skin has always been mine. That was always that arrangement is you're an artist. I mean, so I mean that to me always blew me away. Yeah. So let's talk about Don. Both of you guys are friends with Don. I mean, I want to hear something about Don.
Why don't you tell me your favorite Don story?
Well, I met Don. I was under contract at Harrah's in Lake Tahoe, and he, as he liked to say, was working the big room.
The big room?
Yeah.
You even got his look. You got that's even Rickles' look.
With this new group called Sister Sledge.
Right.
And that year he also had a young Patti LaBelle opening for him. And on my night off, I went in to see the show. I was sitting at the entertainer's table. And Holmes Hendrickson, who ran Harrah's, in Don's show, towards the end of the show, he used to ask his conductor, he'd hand him a piece of paper, and he'd introduce different people in the audience. And I guess they asked him to introduce me because I was under contract there, and I was there 4 months out of the year, and so they were trying to help me too. And he's looking down, he says, Tony, and we have a guy in the audience tonight. Tony, hop in the sauna. What the hell? Where the hell are you?
Hop in the sauna.
And he says, stand up. Where are you? And I stood up. I said, I'm right here, Mr. Rickles. How do you pronounce that name? I said, it's O Pedisano. He says, is that Italian? I said, Sicilian. And he dropped the microphone. And the band used to do the same thing. And he'd turn around and say, Simon Says, and they put their hands down. And he says, so I detect an accent. Where are you from? I said, Brooklyn. He goes, oh. So after the show, I went back to talk with him a little bit. And at that point, Frank and I had been friends by way of Jilly for 8 years. And again, we immediately clicked. And we stayed friends all through that period of time up until Sinatra was under contract at the Desert Inn. And it was going to be his 77th birthday. This is December 1992. Okay. And I said to Frank, so who do you want to have on the show with you? And I mentioned a comedian's name, I will not mention. And Frank said, if I want polite laughter, I'll hire Maud Saul. He said, I want someone that's going to create some tumult. He says, I got an idea. He says, how about Bullethead?
Bullethead.
And I said, well, if I think he's under contract at the Golden Nugget. I said, well, let me look. And he says, well, you asked me who I wanted. I told you, you do it. I said, okay. So got in touch with the people over at the Nugget because Steve Wynn was looking to close the showroom because when Frank left the Nugget and went to the DI, one by one, all the other performers left and went to the DI. And so conversation was had with Steve Wynn. It would be cheaper for you, instead of keeping the room open for the next 9 months so Don can play out his next 3 engagements, why don't you buy him out of the deal? And the deal was made. I said, okay, what do I do next? I called Burton Cohen, who was the head of the Desert Inn, and I said, listen, Frank wants to have Rickles. We were able to get him out of his deal at the Nugget. What do you say you sign him here? And he says, yeah, we'd love to have him as part of the family here at the Desert Inn. How much does he make per show? And I added 5,000 on top of what he was getting to the nugget. And he says, yeah, we could handle that. That's okay. He says, so we'll use that as a premiere and an announcement engagement that Don is now part of the Desert Inn family. So now I call Rickles. His manager, Joe Scandori, had just passed away. He had no manager at all, Don. And I said, listen, I want to talk to you about something. Yeah, well, what? I said, well, Frank wants to have you on the show with him for his 77th birthday. They're making a big deal. All the magazine shows are flying in from Los Angeles and blah, blah, blah. He says, yeah, but I'm under contract at the Nugget. I says, well, not if you don't want to be. What do you mean? I said, how about if you get 75 cents on a dollar not to play there anymore? They're going to buy you out. You're kidding? No. And then what? I said, well, the Desert Inn wants to put you on over there to be part of the family. Really? I said, yeah. How's it feel to make $5,000 a show more than you were making at the Nugget? Jesus Christ. Oh, my
That's
God.
great.
Oh. So that's how it started. And about a month after we did that engagement, he calls me up and he says, listen, I know Frank comes first. And I said, no, Frank, first, second, and third. And he laughed. He says, so how would you feel about working with me too? I said, I'm flattered. I'm thrilled. I'm honored. You know, and at the time I was doing some things with Elliot Wiseman. And because as long as Frank was working, I wasn't going to go on the road with Don. And so Elliot's son used to go, and I'd take care of everything by phone, and then Elliot's kid would go on the road. And he's now managing Joe Bonamassa. That's how it started.
Wow.
With me and Don.
So you were his manager, pretty much became his manager. You did his booking.
Technically, I was his road manager. Eventually, I became his full-time manager.
I can hear him saying, Jesus Christ.
Jesus Christ.
Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
My favorite Don story was when we were in Atlantic City. It's going back to him introducing people. And I was with Rod Carew, so I called Tony to get some tickets. And I've told the story before. But I called Tony to get some tickets. He said, sure, come on over. So at the end of the show, Don gets the note, and he says, ladies and gentlemen, we are thrilled to have an American hero here tonight. Baseball Hall of Famer, 3,000 hits, 7 batting titles. I'm proud to have our guest, Mr. Rod Carew. Rod, please stand up. And Rod stands up. He takes a hero's wave. He's adulated. And he said, and he's here with Frank Pace, who's a fag from the FBI. Now, that doesn't mean anything at all. Those words mean nothing.
That's done.
But everybody laughs
That's
to this
done.
day.
The delivery. It don't matter what he's saying.
So I'll tell you, one of my favorite things that went on when I've got 100 of them, but the last year or so of Frank's performing life, I was able to put Don on the show, sharing the bill with him, although Don would only do like a half hour instead of an hour and 20 minutes. And so we left Palm Springs and we flew to St. Louis. We opened the Kiel Center in St. Louis. Right after the show, back on the jet, fly to Chicago in anticipation of opening the United Center in Chicago. And so we check into the Ambassador East Hotel, where Frank liked to stay, and we're downstairs in the pump room having dinner. And it looked like, again, it looked like the Last Supper, okay? And I'm on one side of Frank, and Barbara Sinatra's on the other side, and across the table is Rickles and Barbara Rickles, and then people on either side of the table. And so Frank orders a minute steak, and the waiter brings him a minute steak with a side dish with some French fries, and he brings him a brand new bottle of ketchup. And so Frank opens the ketchup, and nothing's coming out. So I said, Frank, if you stick the knife in it, I got this, Tony. So now he slams the bottle on the table like this. Still nothing's coming out. Now he's hitting the end of the bottle like this. Everyone at the table is beginning to look at him. And so very casually, he takes the bottle and he throws it over his shoulder, and it hits the wall behind him, and the ketchup is running down. And now everyone at the table is thinking, oh, shit, he's in a pissed off mood. And I nudged Don onto the table, and I went like this. And Don says, Frank, yeah, what? He says, can you pass the ketchup?
Never missed a beat.
That's
huh?
him.
That's Rickles, huh? Right there.
Nope.
I heard that that Rickles had met Sinatra because of his mother. Rickles' mother's name was Edna, is that right?
Etta.
Etta.
Etta went to
And-
Dolly.
Etta went to Dolly and
Yeah.
said, "My kid is playing out in Vegas."
Yeah.
And he said, "Would you stop by?" And
She went to the Fontainebleau. Frank was
Miami.
working and Dolly was there, and she went up, "Can you help my boy?" And you got it, Etta. And he and Jilly went into a club called Murray Franklin's, which was in Miami, which is where Don was working. A little tiny joint, maybe seated 100 people, like he used to say in Rockin' Chairs. He says that was their gimmick. He says, and one night, out of the blue, in walks Sinatra with Jilly and all his rocket scientist friends, Vito Bombats, and again, and Rickles did typical Rickles, and he said, "Oh my God, ladies and gentlemen, look who's here!" And the people turned and they look, and Rickles says, "Frank, be yourself. Stand up and hit somebody."
What a great line. That's just a great line.
And Frank laughed, and everybody else laughed.
You hope Frank laughs.
Yeah, that's what Rickles used to say. Because otherwise, I'd be in a hook in New Jersey. But one of my personal stories about Don, and you know this story, I actually was privileged to be the, for lack of another term, the MC at Don's memorial service in 2017 when he passed. And Don used to say that laughter is the best disinfectant to even the most sensitive problems. And that was his attitude. That was his point of view.
By the way, Frank, Don, for all of his acerbiqueness on stage, was the nicest man
Oh, he was,
I've ever met.
to quote Sinatra, Rickles was a bar of chocolate.
Yeah.
Wow.
And he used to do a thing with Frank. Frank would start teasing with him, and he never knew whether Frank was pissed off or just breaking his chops. And Rickles had this phrase that sometimes he'd have to say it 14 times to get Frank to finally start to laugh. Frank would say, "God damn it. Oh, God bless you, Frank. You stupid son. Oh, God bless you, Frank." Ultimately, Frank would start to laugh.
Yeah, I said in the book that Don Rickles is maybe the only man that I met that never made an enemy.
No.
Everybody loved Don.
Absolutely.
Everybody loved Don.
Absolutely. We'd walk through kitchens and people would run to say hello. Yeah.
And of course, to be insulted by him was
Because
an honor.
that was an honor.
An honor,
As a
sure.
matter of fact, when we did the tribute to Don at the Apollo, there were a lot of people that came. Johnny Depp, I introduced Johnny Depp to Rickles at Sinatra's 80th birthday show at the Shrine Auditorium. And so now we're at the Apollo doing this honoring Rickles. And he says, we met backstage at the Shrine Auditorium on Sinatra's 80th birthday. He says, and I was absolutely crushed. He said, because Don was very nice and polite to me. And I think, oh my God, he hates me. He must think I'm a terrible actor. So he says, I went to therapy. So later on in the evening, Depp goes out and he's sitting in the house. And ultimately, as always, the show ends up with Rickles doing what he did. And he looked over and he says, so-and-so is here and so-and-so is here. And he's doing bits. And he says, and Johnny Depp is here. He says, and thank God he decided to wear some real clothes instead of that stupid pirate crap. And the camera turns over to Depp and he goes.
So anyway, you tell that story about being a master of ceremonies at Don's.
So we were on our way. I had him working, sharing the bill with Joan Rivers at the convention center in Atlantic City. And in 1992, after Jilly got killed in a car crash, I had a lot of pressure on me. I'm the one who had to break the news to Frank and settle his estate, and I ended up with Bell's palsy. And thankfully, within a week, it went away. So now, cut to, this is around 2010, and we're flying. I'm on the plane with Rickles to go to Atlantic City, and I'm feeling this twitching on the side of my face. I said, oh, no, not again. Jesus Christ. I didn't say anything to him. So we get to the hotel. I get him settled. The next day, I wake up, and it's in full bloom. I don't know if you've ever seen someone with Bell's palsy. It's like your face is made out of wax, and you got a little too close to a flame, and it's just like this. Yeah. So I go to the venue, And I put the show together, rehearse the band, rehearse all the bits. Everything's great. I go back, change, knock on the hotel room door, and Don opens the door, and I'm standing there like this. Not a word about me. How's the band? How's the house? How's the dressing room? Blah, blah, blah. Great. Okay. We go over, we do the show. Fantastic. Now we're in the dressing room after the show having some booze, Joan Rivers and some casino executives. And about 15 minutes into this, Rickles says, well, I guess it falls to me to address the elephant in the room. So people are going, oh, geez, what's it going to do to Tony? Jesus Christ. He says, Tony, you're in a room full of people who love, admire, and respect you. He says, however, we took a vote, and the results are unanimous, and I guess it falls to me to tell you that we who all love and respect you feel that you're too short to play the lead in Phantom of the Opera.
You're right. Humor diffuses any
Rickles.
situation. But it does. It diffuses any situation, doesn't
Absolutely.
it? No matter how bad it is. Doesn't I can listen to you talk forever. I mean,
Thank you,
not so much because of the stories, which are great, but the way you tell the stories.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, you really could. You could spill the yarn, man.
Appreciate that.
Really good stuff. I mean, I could listen to it forever. I heard Bogart's death affected Sinatra a lot too. When Bogey died, they were close. I guess.
They were close. As a matter of fact, he had a hand in actually helping
Humphrey
Frank.
Bogart. He was an actor of some note.
He was a rapper, Derek. He was a rapper.
Why did you say it?
No, that's okay.
So anyway,
No, he actually had a hand in coaching Frank on men's haberdashery and style and how to dress and all of that stuff. Frank looked up to him. He looked up to him a lot. And then he had also, he looked up to Lauren Bacall, or Lauren Bacala, as he used to
Lauren
say.
Bacala.
well, Bogart was a man's man.
Absolutely.
I could see why Frank would look up to him growing up as Frank did.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
He
for
would,
sure.
he would be one of those people
Class.
that class and put him on a pedestal. When Frank was on an even pedestal with him, the stuff that goes on in your formative years stays with you for the rest of your life.
Sure.
I had watched the documentary on Sinatra. It's on, I think, your show is going to be on Amazon as well, right?
Yeah, the one I did, I got a call from a
Can
guy.
you hold that up for us?
I got a call from this guy, Simon Napier Bell, who's a respected documentarian in London, in the UK. He's also a rock and roll manager. And he said, listen, I want to do a documentary celebrating Sinatra's 100th birthday. He says, but I don't have a big budget, and I was wondering if maybe you could help me. And he says, and I also would like to have you on camera for a little bit. Well, along with Alice Cooper and Sir Tim Rice, I'm on camera like 35% of the time. It's very, very flattering. And I'm named as one of the producers on it. It was on Netflix for about 3 years, and recently it's now on Amazon Prime.
So it's going to be on Amazon now. Our viewers
Amazon
can
Prime.
check it out on Amazon Prime.
What's the name of it?
It's called Sinatra, to be frank.
To be frank.
Yeah.
Sinatra to be frank.
Sinatra at 100.
Well, I had watched the documentary on Sinatra, to prepare myself for the interview with you, of course. And one of the things that kind of shocked me was that everybody who's read The Godfather is under the impression that From Here to Eternity came back because the mob got him the part because of the horse's head and all of that.
No.
And in the documentary, it said that Ava Gardner pretty much was responsible for him getting that bit.
Here's the deal with that, and that's what part of the catalyst to get me to write the book. Nancy Sinatra Sr. started hitting me over the head to write a book way back in 1993. She said, you guys are joined at the hip. You've been friends for so long, and then especially, with Jilly, it was like the three of you, and stuff about Frank that a lot of people don't know. And ultimately, he and I would have talks about this and that and the things in his career, and he would tell me the true story behind some of the things that had been romanticized and perpetuated. And I said, well, Frank, why didn't you ever tell the true story about how that came to be? He says, hey, I learned the hard way. He says, I had to pick my battles with the press. He says, I could just picture me trying to explain something like me getting out of my deal with Tommy Dorsey, how it actually happened. And the reporter saying, yeah, Frank, nice try. He said, so I said, yeah, but Frank, the truth is the truth. He says, hey, you feel that passionate about it? You fix it. I said, I will. So, okay.
The Tommy
Good.
Dorsey thing, of course, it was rumored that it was the mob that got him out of
but
it was
no,
lawyers, right?
It was
lawyers.
an absolute financial deal. He was bought out of it. The big bands was beginning to wane, and they offered him the equivalent of what would have been $750,000 in cash in today's world.
Wow.
Yeah.
So
there's no.
But it was
that story is not sexy. As the mob,
exactly, but see,
got me out.
Frank was really drowning because he was paying 33% of every nickel he got after he got out of the contract. He was paying that to Dorsey. He was paying another 10% to the attorney that drew up the agreement. He was paying another 20% to his new manager at the time. And then he was in debt to the IRS. He was literally paying out 93 cents on a dollar. And he was living on 7 cents on a dollar. He had a wife and 2 kids.
That's better than Billy, because Billy was earning $1, and he was trying to spend $2.
They had Frank by the Cayones. Me, when they bury me, they're going to bury me ass up so they can screw me into death just as they did every day of my life. That's how they're going to get me, Frank. Ass up in the air. Here lies Billy O'Connor. Yeah, take a poke.
The line forms to the left.
So one of my favorite things about Daddy Dearest was after every show, we would meet in Don's dressing room,
Mm-hmm.
and we would polish up, me, Tony, and Don would polish up a bottle of vodka,
Mm-hmm.
and we would have pigs in a blanket.
Oh yeah.
If Barbara wasn't around.
Mm-hmm.
If Barbara was around, she didn't allow Don to eat pigs in a blanket. But Don fucking loved those pigs in a blanket. He would gobble them up, and every night he would say, "Where's Barbara?
Mm-hmm.
Is Barbara coming?" He says, "Well, Barbara went home." He goes, "All right, I love her to death, but I love my pigs in a blanket."
Mm-hmm.
So Tony O, get the pigs.
Go get them. He says, "Yeah, she's home. She's home, sitting up in our master bedroom with the jewelry signaling ships." He said, and we live 30 miles from the beach.
She was amazing. She didn't care if he drank vodka as long as he didn't eat the pigs in a blanket.
As long as he didn't eat the pigs in the blanket. And he
Amazing.
He and Newhart were going on a cruise, and Don had she made him give up vodka, so he stopped drinking for a while.
Mm-hmm.
So they had to load non-alcoholic beer onto the cruise vessel for Don.
Mm-hmm.
That didn't last very long.
Well, you know what happened? One night at the Desert Inn, they discovered that they thought Don might have diabetes. And so we were about to go to the Desert Inn. This is after Frank passed. And Don calls me up and he said, "I got a real problem." I said, "What's the matter?" He says, "Well, the doctors think I may have diabetes. And when I come back Monday after the gig in Vegas," he said, "they got to do a bunch of tests." And I says, "Oh, well, that's not a problem." He says, "No, the problem is," he says, "they don't want me to have any booze up there. None at all." I mean, he used to have 2 drinks in the dressing room. He'd have another drink in the wings. Harry, God rest his soul, used to come out on stage and bring him another drink. And then after the show, he'd have a drink. Then he'd take a shower. And then we'd go have dinner.
Then we have dinner and drinks.
Yeah. So I said, "Well, yeah, we'll work it out. Don't worry about it." So I got him drinking, like you were saying. I got him O'Doul's. So now he's doing the show first night. And there's a spot in the show after he used to do the Yankee Doodle Dandy bit. He would do James Cagney and he'd run off into the wings. And I'd be waiting there for him with a towel. And he runs off into the wings and he collapses in my arms. And he goes, "Oh, Tony, Jesus Christ, help me." I said, "What's the matter, Don?" He says, "I haven't heard my act in 20 years. I stink."
That's pretty funny.
That's a great line.
That's pretty funny. So Sinatra was a well-known drinker of Jack Daniels, but not quite as well-known as we may have affected, because I think Tony was doctoring his drinks, weren't you?
Not doctoring them. I would choreograph them. See, like I used to do with Don on talk shows, I would have the stage manager bring me a cup, and I would fill it with ice and water, and then float the booze on the top and tell them, don't shake it. So the first thing you taste is booze. After that, it mixes together. You can't tell that it's watered down. So that's what I used to do with Frank's drink on the stage. I used to put it in the piano. Same thing. I would pour water and Jack on the top. So the first thing he would taste was Jack. And ironically enough, Jackie Gleason is the guy that got him to start drinking Jack Daniels, believe it or not.
That's the kind of drinks that Billy would serve at his bar too. He would float a little booze on top of water and ice.
Plenty of ice. That's one of the tricks in the bar business, just like McDonald's. And they learned it from McDonald's. The smaller the cubes, the more ice cubes you can get into the glass, the less booze you got to pour. You pour an ounce of booze into the old ice cubes that we used to get from the tray, it disappears. It looks like this.
Sure. Everybody's
going to bitch. Give me a shot, but you take the ice cubes that they have at McDonald's. The ice machine costs you more than the booze. I mean, the idea was to get the small ice cubes.
Well, the first time I went to the house in the desert, Frank went behind the bar, and he puts 2 buckets on the bar with ice, and he's holding the Jack Daniels, and he says, I know you drink Jack. How do you take it? And I said, on the rocks. He says, were you trying to be a hero or something? I said, what? He says, try it with a little water. He says, it tastes better. He says, and you could get where you're going without getting hurt along the way. Hey, we could drink that stuff. We would drink. We killed a bottle of booze. We killed a whole bottle of Jack the night that Bill Clinton was elected. Yeah. We started drinking. We opened a brand new bottle at 9:00, and by 2:00 in the morning, I was opening another one.
Well, Don says that the proudest moment of his life was when Frank invited him to Ronald Reagan's inaugural. And he said that was the proudest moment of life because then Don roasted Reagan.
Well, he thought he was kidding. Don was on vacation in Hawaii with Barbara, and Frank called him. And he said, listen, I know you're on vacation, but I need you to pack your bags, you and Barbara, and come to Washington. He says, why? He says, because I want you to do the Reagan inaugural gala with me. So Don thought he was teasing, so he hung up. And Frank called him the next day. He says, so did you make your plans? He said, well, what plans? He said, I told you, you got to come to Washington. Yeah, but Frank, how do they feel about that? And he says, well, I already had that discussion. And what happened was when he told them that he wanted to have Rickles on the show, oh, no, we can't do that. Frank says, hey, you don't have Rickles, you don't have me. Oh, well, what's he going to do? He said, whatever he wants.
Mm-hmm. And
the rest is history.
Pretty much whatever he wanted.
Yeah.
That was a great show. And that was a 180 for Sinatra. I mean, because Reagan was a close friend. Is that why he went he was a lifelong Democrat?
And he remained a lifelong Democrat. He said, but, sometimes the best man for the job may not be in your party. He says, you got to vote for the best man for the job. I mean, here's another quick story. He helped Reagan become the governor of California, he and Dean Martin, okay? And so they were campaigning and they were doing a fundraiser at a big venue in Sacramento. And Reagan is sitting in the front row and Dean is on stage with Frank. And Dean says, Pally, do you think if he becomes the governor, he might give me a little present? And Frank said, well, what present? What the hell are you talking about? He said, something they ain't using anymore. He says, like what? He says, Alcatraz. Says, Alcatraz? He says, yeah, Pally, it's something I've always wanted, a house on the rocks with water on the side.
and of course, Dean Martin wasn't nearly the drinker that they played him out. He was a big golfer.
No,
right?
he used to drink Martinelli's apple juice most of the time.
Is that right?
On television. Yeah, it wasn't until after his son passed that he started drinking solid. But
yeah, his son, when I was in the World Football League in 1974, his son was a wide receiver.
Really?
And his son came into camp, and he was doing pretty well the first couple of days. The third day, they put on the pads, and the fourth day, I was driving him to the airport because when they put on the pads, they start hitting. So when he was driving to the airport, I said, Dean, you think that your dad would come do the national anthem for us? He said, my dad doesn't get off the couch for anything. But
Well, the Arabs have a terrible, terrible curse, and it doesn't sound that bad when you first hear it. It said, "May you outlive your children,"
It is
and
a
it
terrible
doesn't
curse.
sound that bad until you think about it. And you talk about Dean Martin, and the same thing happened to Don. Right?
Yeah.
Don
Yeah,
Yeah.
Larry.
lost his son.
Yeah, Larry died.
And Larry was the sweetest,
six years before Don.
sweetest guy has ever lived. Also, like he didn't fall far from the tree.
No. And my parents went through the same thing. My sister was killed in a car crash
It's
at
an
age,
awful.
And
age
did mine.
23.
My parents did. My brother passed away.
Yeah,
at
my
23.
brother passed away too young, and he was a deep sea diver, and he died in a fire. And here I was a fireman in New York, and I said, "With the irony of God, I'll probably drown sometime. That's probably going to be my end." But I mean, it is the worst thing that could happen to a parent, and every parent's nightmare.
Yeah.
So why do you think Frank still matters?
Because he was real. He
How
was
so?
real, and he patterned how he performed after basically almost being an actor. He said you have to approach every lyric as though it were a script. He says you're telling a story, and you have to find something like actors do within yourself that you can attach to that lyric. And so he's believable. And, he used to tease about there's an album that he did called Only the Lonely. And the album cover itself won a Grammy. It's Frank, like a half a face of Pagliacci as a clown.
Mm-hmm.
And he used to say that album should be available by prescription only. But he says you sit there and you listen to the trouble this guy is going through, and you figure, hey, if we hung our problems out on a clothesline 99 times, I'll pick mine back after listening to this.
Yeah. So, Tony, we're getting short on time. Why don't you tell me and Billy one more funny Sinatra story and one more funny Rickles story?
Jeez, that's a beauty. You call me flat-footed.
He come from the poet laureate of loneliness to tell me a funny story. Yeah.
Well, I'll tell you a story about Frank that again involves Dean. The very last time we had dinner together was at Da Vinci's in Beverly Hills, which is not even there anymore. It's closed. So it was Sinatra and myself and Dean and his manager, Mort Viner. And at this point in time, Dean was a little bit frail. He was still very with it, but he spoke very softly. And he fell into that habit like a lot of older people do. What'd you say? Excuse me. And Frank was wearing a hearing aid at this point. If he chose to wear it, you couldn't tell him. This particular night, he had the hearing aid in. And so we're sitting there, and Dean would start to tell a story. And 15 minutes later, Frank would finish the story. And then 20 minutes later, Frank would start to tell the same story, and Dean would finish the story. But all through this, Dean kept saying, "What'd you say, Pally? What would you say?" And it was beginning to annoy Frank. So he said, "For crying out loud, why don't you go to a doctor?" I said, "Get a hearing aid. For crying out loud, that's ridiculous." What'd you say? So Frank leaned across the table, and he grabbed Dean by the shirt, and he took his hearing aid out, and he stuck it in Dean's ear. And he turned it up so the point was beginning to squeal. So Mort leaned over and turned it down a little bit. Frank waited a long minute and very quietly said, "Now, isn't that better?" And Dean says, "Who the hell are you yelling at?"
That's a great story.
Two constant performance. Two of the best ever. Two of the best ever.
Well, Tony, thanks so much. Unless Billy's got some more questions.
The only thing I got is nothing but praise, man. I had a ball. We've done a lot of these now,
Pleasure was mine.
over a dozen, and I had
Thank you.
ball. I can listen to you forever.
And I'm going to be enthralled and waiting to see the book.
I want to see the book, and I want to see that documentary as well.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
With that, we'll say good night to Tony. It's a pleasure having you.
Thank you for asking.
You're always a close friend. Always
will
been.
be.
And always will be.
You're stuck with me.
Good. Thank God.
Thank you, Frank. Thank you, Billy.
Thank you, Tony.
Thank
very
you,
much.
Derek.
Appreciate it.
So, Derek, now
Pleasure.
we have to. We have one other piece of business. Our picks.
Oh, you're going to skewer me for my two losses last week, huh?
I wasn't going to mention it. Far be it from me to mention that you had 2 picks last week.
And they both went in the toilet.
But you're still 3 out of 5.
Yeah, I know. But
so
here's the deal.
You're hitting 60%. Of course, me putting no time into it whatsoever. I'm 67% because even though I lost last week, that freaking Nick Fowles, he's lost 1 fucking game, and he had to lose the week I picked him. So let's get to our picks. Who you like this week? And I'm going to bet you did not give Derek his list.
No, I did not give Derek his list. You're absolutely right. But I can pull up a list quickly.
No, just pick one out.
Well, I know my game. Yeah.
Okay,
well,
so
look, I'm 3-2. But wait a second. I got an explanation here. I said from the jump, nobody beats the bookies. Yeah. 10% is 10%. So that's it.
So that's why you were wrong? That's why you picked the loser?
Hey, my loser was, it looked good. But it's not like grenades. It's not like grenades. They don't pay you for being close.
Yeah.
It's not like that. But this week, I like, as you notice, I only pick underdogs, right? So I've had 5 underdogs, 3-2. This week, I like the Rams. I like the Rams. They're a 7.5-point underdog. And I'm sorry, the Rams are a 7.5-point favorite. I like the dog. I like the Washington Redskins at home. I can't see why the line went down. It opened at 7.5, went down to 7. That don't make any sense to me. So I'm going to go with the bookies, and I'm going to take the Washington Redskins +7.
Okay. So now Derek or Billy or somebody's got to give me a game.
Well, I have the games. I don't have the.
Well, just
spread.
pick one.
Texans and the Jaguars.
Texans and the Jaguars. Okay. Where are they playing, and what's the point spread?
Texas is 1, I think.
Okay, Texas is 1. Whatever it is, I'm going to take the Texans and the points.
You're going to give the point. I think it's Texas -1, right?
Yeah, I think
I'm
so.
told for the top of my head,
Oh, okay. I can't.
Okay, I think they're playing in Jacksonville. Texans just fired Bill O'Brien. They got a new coach. They're going to like him.
-1. Texas -1.
Yeah, I'm going to take the Texans -1.
So you know twice as much about this as me. You know the coach's name. You know everything. I don't pay any attention to it. I just look at the numbers. That's all I know. And apparently we both know the same thing because we're the same.
No. You know less than me because you're
all right.
You're trailing me.
But I got to tell you, I thought last week's game, the Miami game over Seattle. Seattle was the game went from 7 all the way down to 6.5. I said, you know what? I said this is rehearsed. This is going to fall just the way it. When they pull within 2, with about 4 minutes to go, I said Miami's within 2, and then Seattle went right down to score. They're up 9. I said, look at this. This is perfect. I said, what they're going to do is they're going to kick a field goal because they need 2 scores, and they're going to win by 6, and everybody's going to get screwed by the hook, which I've been screwed by 1,000,000 times. So I thought it was.
And when they bury you upside down, you get screwed by the hook again.
Screwed again, just like I have every day of my life. My partner.
So with that,
thanks for bringing Tony O on today. I tell you, he was the best. Man. It was great. It was great.
So next week, our guest will be Molly Ann Brasigliano. The queen.
Do you know anybody Irish? You don't know anybody Irish? What is it?
The queen of sports collectibles.
Wow. So this is a world I know nothing about. I understand it's like $1 billion industry.
It's a $1 billion industry. She's a great lady. She's put a lot of money in Rod's pocket. She will continue to put a lot of money in Rod's pocket. That's one of the reasons she's doing the show. She's a very interesting.
10% is 10%.
She's a very interesting person, and she'll be a great guest.
Well, it's a whole new world for me. I don't know anything about collectibles.
Yeah, it'll be great.
Yeah.
So
cool.
I hope to see you next week. Right side up.
Yeah.
Because if you're upside down,
you're going to come by and put a poke in there, or you're just going to let it go.
I know you're taking it in the yes. All right.
Thank you very much for tuning in. It's a Mick, a Mook, and a Mike. You guys are the best.
Wait.
What?
Do we want to do a presidential poll and have Derek put up who you're going to vote for, Trump or Biden?
No, we're not going to get political. Not going to get political.
I thought.
You mean on the
webpage?
Oh, on the webpage, you put yes or no underneath.
Yeah, or
but no comments.
Yeah,
I'll put up a poll on Facebook.
But just put Y or N. No comments because they'll be deleted. We don't want to hear the story. Just say who you're going to vote for.
Or put Trump or Biden.
That's it.
That's
T or B. That's it.
Just
We
Pick
don't want to
one
hear
box.
why. We don't want to know your
We don't
story.
care.
We don't care. We don't want to hear. We don't want to hear none of that. Just T or B. That's the end of the ball game.
Okay, and that's the end of this ball game. Good night, folks.
Good night, folks. Say good night wherever you are. What's that?
Mrs. Calabash.
We'll see you next week.